Can you reball a BGA chip without having a stencil at hand? I asked myself that question and started to see if it is possible, whether I have a steady hand or not. That is why you see that there are already a few solder balls placed onto the chip before I started the recording. First of all, you of course have to clean the BGA chip and remove all the old solder from the solder pads. After having cleaned the chip, put a small amount of flux onto the chip and spread it evenly around the whole surface of the chip. The flux is there to make sure the balls will stick to the chip. Just drop some solder balls onto the center of the chip and start moving them around. From time to time you have to change your viewpoint and look at the chip from the side in order to see if you have not forgotten to place any solder balls. Once all the solder balls are in place, you have to move the chip over to the hot plate. I found that the best way to do this is to use one of these thin metal pry tools. You can slowly slide the pry tool underneath the chip. Gently lift the pry tool and the chip up and place the chip onto the hot plate. Set the hot plate to a temperature of about 220 degrees Celsius or 428 degrees Fahrenheit and switch it on. The temperature will slowly ramp up, and at around 180 degrees Celsius or 356 degrees Fahrenheit the solder balls will start to melt. One by one you see them melting, and eventually they will align perfectly and attach themselves to the solder pads of the chip. Let the temperature rise until it reaches the set temperature. If it would take the hot plate too long to reach this temperature, just observe the chip and switch off the hot plate when all solder balls are attached to the chip. I tend not to leave the chip on the hot plate for too long after having switched it off. Use the same pry tool and slide it under the chip and slowly move it away from the hot plate. The chip used in this experiment already has had some abuse during the earlier reflow attempts, in order to get the device working. That is why I noticed when cleaning the flux off of the chip after reballing, that one of the balls did not stick to the chip. This was because the solder pad was ripped off the chip circuit board. I thoroughly inspected the chip and noticed that the pad was used and had traces connected to it. Therefore, it was not useful to solder it back onto the circuit board. Afterwards, I also noticed that the thin circuit board the chip was mounted on was warped substantially, and any attempt to solder on the chip might have failed anyway. But the conclusion is that reballing a BGA chip without having a stencil at hand is possible. However, it will take a little bit longer.